Hi, I'm Maureen, and I ask a lot of questions. So I made this podcast to have a space to discuss and explore the hard questions about Christianity and faith. So join me on my quest for Christ. Okay, hey guys, this is Maureen here. You are listening to the Quest for Christ podcast. I'm here with a friend of mine, Kevin. Why don't you introduce yourself, Kevin?
What's up, everybody? My name's Kevin.
So today we are talking about a really interesting topic. We're actually talking about why God doesn't reveal himself to the masses, or if he reveals himself, in what way. So before we get started, I was thinking maybe we could just kind of talk a little bit about our backgrounds, where we're coming from, because we've been friends for a long time, but we have different perspectives, kind of different worldview on things, right? So I was thinking of maybe talking a little bit, Kevin, about your background with, I guess, spirituality or theology and where you are at now.
Yep. Okay. I don't know where to start on that. So I'll give you a little bit more background than just myself personally. So my mom was raised as a Christian. My dad actually had 14 siblings that lived under one roof, and all had very different beliefs, or religious beliefs. So under one roof, you had Muslim, Sikhs, Hindus, Catholics, and Christian. So if you say to yourself that all these religions can't seem to coexist, my dad's family is proven fact that it can. So moving past that, when my folks ended up getting married, my dad converted to Christianity because it was a thing, and I don't know if personal values and all that stuff really correlated into their specific future. But anyways, that's where we ended up in. So growing up, we essentially grew up under Christian values, and I wouldn't say values, but we had a Christian upbringing, right? So we celebrated Christmas. We went to church, not regularly. Our family, we don't really go to church every Sunday, stuff like that, right? But we kind of grew up under the Christian household, I guess you want to say. Moving further along, I kind of everybody tries to find their faith. A lot of families, they essentially believe what they've been brought up to believe, right? So like I said, we didn't have a very strict household when it came to religion. So our religious views weren't as strict. And I'm just going to use the word strict loosely, but you can also use the word devoted. But we didn't have a very strict upbringing when it came to religion. So it kind of opened the doors, especially with my dad growing up the way that he did. I think not a lot of households and families, especially traditionalists, when they're raised under one specific religion for X amount of generations, then it's natural to continue that tradition, right? Because we didn't have a very strict upbringing, my dad was very much under the notion that everybody needs to discover their own faith and discover their own path and beliefs by themselves, right? So I, in my adolescent years, you and I both went to Catholic school, so it continued. And even in elementary school back home, we went to a Catholic school as well, right? So I don't know why there was a decision made, but that's just how it played out. So I kind of eventually, a friend of mine was going through certain challenges in life, and he became born again. And I supported this friend, and I went to church with them, and well, actually, he invited me to come along, and obviously, like, we were really good friends, so we did it for support and stuff like that, right? Because I noticed when you become born again, a lot of people tend to disassociate with their bad habits or things that they want to kind of leave in their past, and in order to work on themselves and being better Christians and things of that nature. So I didn't want that to happen because we were really good friends, right? So he asked me to come along. So every now and then, every couple of weekends, I'd go to the church, and it was a great experience. Like, I'm not gonna lie. It was very youth oriented, which is something that I find very appealing, right? Because in my younger days, you correlate church, but with, I'm sorry to say, but it's like, a lot of times it's very boring for a kid, right? Or even as a teenager, like, there's better things there's other things you could be doing, right, that are a little bit more entertaining, right? But the thing I liked about this church was that it was very youth oriented, and it was very trendy, and not trendy, but the youth were actually very involved, right? So that's one thing I really gravitated to. So moving along, I know I'm kind of like
No, it's
exhausting
cool.
I'm exhausting my intro here,
No,
but
not at all.
yeah. So just a little bit of background. That I think that's kind of what it was. So I tried to do the same thing, right? And I wouldn't necessarily call myself born again, but that's when I actually took my faith a little bit more seriously, right? And seeing as I grew up in a Christian household, naturally, my first inclination was to gravitate towards, the Bible. I could have picked up any other religious scripture had I chosen to, but I think that's one of the things that people don't really take into consideration when discussing religious beliefs, is that a lot of the times we believe what we believe. I mean, we believe what we believe what we believe because we've been brought up to believe that, right? A lot of families don't really give their children the opportunity to discover their faith. It's bestowed upon them, right? Naturally, I gravitated towards the New King James version of the Bible. I read it, obviously not cover to cover, but it was one of those things where you kind of like you want to go through the process yourself. And people ask me and say, well, you say that you're Christian, but you don't go to church. I'm like, I never really correlated one and the other, because I think your belief is something that's more personal than going to a building and listening to somebody speak, right? And there are a number of reasons why people go to church, right? Especially support. Like, a lot of people have different circumstances in the life that they're living, right? And one of the things that I've come to realize is that, like, a lot of people go to church for support and comfort. It's not to hear somebody speak about God. It's to interact with other people and hear their stories, and essentially it's a way to find hope in despair, right? I personally chose not to go to church regularly because, again, I think my faith is mine and mine alone. It's mine to discover. So, and it's also mine to interpret, right? So I can easily, go to a church A, church B, church C, and the scriptures will be the same, obviously, right? If you're reading from the New King James, for example, right? But the reality is much like an abstract work of art, right? Your interpretation of the piece it will differ from the next 10 people around you, right? So I just treaded more on the line of caution that way because I think the way people interpret things and the way people share that interpretation with others is very important. And it could be not, I wouldn't say dangerous, but
detrimental.
No, not even that, but like it could have certain repercussions, right? Because a lot of people say that my God is a loving God, and then other people say, well, my God is like I don't want to say fearing God, but what's the expression in that way? I think you'd be a little bit more.
Are you saying so, like wrathful? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Well, no, not even wrathful, but I don't know. There's a terminology for that. I forget what it is, but more along the lines of a very disciplined God, where you have to do this, you have to do that, et cetera, right? So yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, so where would you put yourself today? Like, what's your worldview? What do you hold as truth today?
Well, here, I mean, I guess moving further along into my personal beliefs is after, taking. Were you in our? Did you go to camp with us in high school?
I don't.
No. Okay, so I went to this camp and. There was this exercise. It was like a team building exercise, right? And we had to essentially climb up this scaffolding. It was pretty high. It was maybe 3 stories high, something like that. And you're strapped into a harness, and everybody linked up to a bunch of pulleys, right? And the harness, everybody. And when I say everybody, there's maybe like a team of like 15 people that hold a line, which is essentially your safety line, right? So the objective here was to climb up the scaffolding, right? And once you reach the very top, right, there's a bell maybe 4 meters away or 3 meters, something like that, right? And the objective here is to jump, right? And there's nothing at the bottom, right? There's only the bell in front of you. And the objective is to jump, or to rather leap and try to hit the bell, right? And your only line of safety is the team that's holding you, right? So the exercise essentially was called the leap of faith, right? And I make the correlation very much to religion and that very same exercise, because the expression a leap of faith is essentially that, right? There's no promise, there's no guarantee of rewards or anything. You're really just taking a leap into your faith, right? So that's kind of what I went through initially in that stage of my life, right? And then, eventually, as I got older, right, and this is like past my, in my teenage years, and even in my teenage years, it's just, I found that, it was something that I was struggling with a while, like the concept of religion and, the fact that it's, I mean, undeniably a very, very destructive force in the world that we live in, right? And the consensus I've reached now is that right now, to summarize this long, long introduction, to summarize my my current beliefs is that I am now an agnostic.
So you're not sure.
I wouldn't say that I'm not sure. I define the word agnostic as something that as somebody who believes that in something greater than themselves, right? What it is specifically, can you write it down in black and white? It's arbitrary, right? Because there's so many religions in the world. You can't say to yourself which one is the right one, because it's just, we live in just such a vast space, and there's been an insurmountable amount of time that's passed since the beginning of human civilization, right? So nobody can actually answer that question, and it goes back down to what is that religion that's been bestowed upon you when you were a child, right? And most people, they just kind of run with whatever religion they've been brought up with, right? So my consensus at the end of the day is that, and I still pray to Jesus, right? Like, people listen to me and say, okay, well, you're not a true Christian because you don't do so and so. I'm like, okay, that's great. You're entitled to your opinion. And this is for the very same reason why I don't go to church, because the most devout Christians are the ones that are more likely to label and target you for your personal beliefs and telling you that you're not doing things the Christian way, right? So there is a lot of persecution, ironically. So that's kind of where I'm at. And, I'm what I consider myself a Christian, because I pray to Jesus. I don't know. The answer is I don't know. And that's why I consider myself agnostic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I consider myself agnostic, right? Because
there's still kind of,
there's a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I get it. I understand. And
yeah,
yeah, I agree. And faith in
yeah.
general is like something.
So yeah, that's kind of.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. No. That's. I think that would essentially just summarize my my religious beliefs. What about you?
So I had I'm not gonna go into too much depth, but I basically will tell you that I'm coming from a Christian perspective. So
Orthodox?
No, not Orthodox. And there's a lot of stuff that you said that are in themselves topics that we could spend hours on. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to go into any of that. I'm just gonna say that from my perspective, through university, I had a small period through high school and university, because Kevin and I actually went to high school together. But I actually left and went to another high school, which was a public high school after that. And then in the public high school, there was a lot of non-Christians there. And we would get into debates at the public high school. And people would say really awful things about Jesus and Christianity. And then also with the Da Vinci Code coming out in university, I got a lot of slack from people. A lot of people saying things that were just not true, but I didn't know at the time that they weren't true. Just saying all these things. And then I wanted to know if what they were saying was true or not. So I had a mini deconstruction in university, or what I would qualify as a mini deconstruction. And then when I had my reconstruction journey, which is my search for the truth, I ended up becoming because my family comes from an Orthodox background, as you know, but I left that section of Christianity and became what I guess we will call a born again Christian. I don't know. I don't really like to put names on it, but yes,
non-denominational.
Non-denominational. Yeah. So my faith, although yes, where you are born or the family you're born in does obviously have an influence on what you believe. In my case, it didn't really push, because a lot of my family actually don't agree with what I say or think or do. So, and in fact, in my family, I have a lot of people who are atheist or agnostic. So as much as that is the case, I would argue that in our day and age, with all the information that comes like online and everything, it's a lot harder to hold to your family's values, because if you don't have a reason for holding them for yourself, it's really easy for them to like just kind of melt away or not really be like, but at least that's my experience. Excuse me. So that's where I'm coming from. So when we talk about the topic today, that's kind of my perspective. It's going to be coming from like a biblical perspective and also like more like a Christian theological perspective. But I want to preface this and say that I am not a theologian. I'm not an expert. I have not studied like theology or any of this stuff. This is just me doing
belief.
me doing my own little research and coming up with things in my own little head. And this whole podcast is just so we can talk freely about questions that are kind of hard to talk about. You know what I mean? Things that like, if you go to the public square, they might arise controversy or taboo where people can fight. And I wanted like a safe space where we can actually discuss these things respectfully.
Yeah.
And yeah, just exchange ideas. So with that being said, so the question that came up was, so I have friends who submitted questions to me, and this was one of the big ones that I felt like should start off the podcast.
Sorry, Mo, where can people submit questions to you on topics?
Good question. I have no idea yet. I post this on YouTube. I'm going to post this on I have a channel that's called More for Christ. It's really old. It's called More and then the number 4 Christ, MAUR for Christ. So that's where the videos are going to go up. And so if anyone has questions and stuff, yeah, I am not going to answer rude or like derogatory things, obviously. Like this is a respectful space to discuss. So if people start like putting personal attacks and stuff, I'm just going to ignore that. So this is like for legitimate questions and legitimate discussion. So yeah. Okay. On that note.
Trolls need not apply.
Pardon? Yeah.
Trolls need not apply.
Yeah. Just be respectful. That's all it is. Yeah. All right. Why hasn't God revealed himself plainly to the masses? So I will tell you that I actually did think about this quite deeply, and I did some research biblically. So I will give my answer, but I feel like you should probably go first because mine is a little bit long-winded. So.
Actually, I'm very curious to see what you've
what I've come up with
determined so far. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So this is where I came from with this question. So I'm coming from a Christian perspective. So I believe that God created the natural world, right? So everything that's within the natural world is what he created. But, and then I don't think it was Dr. Frank Turek. I have some apologists that I really, really love that I follow. And he made a really great analogy where he said, the person who built the computer is not inside the computer. So like God created the natural world, but he exists supernaturally. And I'm literally, I want to almost read to you what I wrote. It says, it might be the case that if Jesus appeared every day in the natural world, then we would attribute his constant appearance as natural. So what I meant is like, right now, like we have the sun every day, right? We see the sun every day. We don't think it's supernatural. We know, even though it's like outside of our physical earth, we see it every day. There's nothing supernatural about it, right? If we had a giant guy floating in the sky all the time, staring down at us, we would assume that that's just natural. It's not supernatural. Like, oh, that's just, Jesus in the sky. He's always there. He's always just sitting there up there. So I feel like then his constant appearance would be natural. And then we would say that he's not divine. Like we don't think that the sun is divine. We know it's a natural thing. So that brings us back to the original issue of unbelief. So for example, I took the big biblical story of the Israelites who were like freed from Egypt. And when they were walking through the desert, God appeared to them in a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud to guide them around the desert. He also gave them manna from heaven. He parted the sea. He did all these supernatural things, and still people didn't believe. So I don't know that appearing, because like to everybody, is even going to cause people to believe. I think even if he appeared physically in the sky, like, hey, look at me, the people, especially if he's there every day, because the only
I'll be like, yeah, it's a hologram or whatever.
No, I feel like if he was there, the only way that this could work, because the question is asked, like, I can only believe if he appears to me. The only, like, let's say he just appeared to you, then the next person would say the same thing. So the only way to remedy this would be to have him permanently in the sky so that everyone, for every generation, everywhere in the world, just like the sun, can see them and experience him. But then again, I don't know if that would really help, because I feel like people would then say, then he's not divine. He's just, we can explain it. It's just the guy in the sky. He's always there. Like gravity is always there. Mm-hmm. So, so what I said is God's signature is his creation. Like that's like his thumbprint, his fingerprint is creation, in its intricacies and its synchronicity. In the microcosm and macrocosms of life and the universe, God is, to me, the best way of explaining everything. If you take away God as a reason for the cause and the fine-tuning of the universe, so if you say there is no God who made the universe and everything in it, then basically you're left with what I would say is an absurd explanation, that essentially no one at no time, with no space or materials to create from, for no reason, created everything that you see perfectly in balance. So like space, time, and matter, they all appear at the same time. That's basic physics, right? They can't exist without each other, space, time, and matter. So they all appear at the same time. So without saying that there's somebody who created that, you're essentially saying that with no space, time, no matter, for no reason, everything appeared suddenly perfectly. And that includes non-material things like logic, mathematics, morality that can't be explained using the scientific method. You can't explain why we have those, right? So, yeah, that's the beginning of what I wrote. What do you think?
Yeah, so I honestly, we're pretty much on the same lines in terms of analysis, which is a little unfortunate because it's more interesting conversation when there's a pro and a con, right? Yeah. But no, I would have to agree there. So one of when you gave me the topic for discussion, I think the first thing that really came to mind was the story of Job, right? And I think you could probably articulate that or summarize that story a little bit more eloquently, if you don't mind indulging the listeners real quick.
The story of Job?
Yeah.
So essentially, from the very beginning, I guess, if I remember correctly, I believe that God was talking to
the devil.
Essentially what was the devil, yeah. Which, by the way, it doesn't use the word devil or Satan in the story, but we know...
Nor Lucifer, I don't think either.
No, we know from the context of the conversation that that's what's in the word. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, hey, look at my servant Job. Isn't he great? He's this, he's that. And the devil's like, well, no, he only worships you because you give him all this stuff. He's rich. He has all this stuff. If I take all of it away, he won't worship you. And he's like, okay, well, let's see. Take it away. You'll see. He's still going to worship me. So the devil essentially strips Job of his health, his family, his wealth, and everything. And Job goes through kind of a bit of a crisis where he's really like suffering and
with plague, diseases,
right. And there's a really
hunger
dialogue section in the book of Job where he has like friends who come and who are like, what did you do wrong? You must have done something bad. That's why God is doing this to you. And he's like, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know why God is doing this to me. Eventually, he stays faithful to the Lord, although he does question him and he's like, what's going on? Why is this happening to me? But he does stay faithful to the Lord, and then the Lord gives him like double what he had before. So yeah, I'm assuming that's what you're asking me. That's
right. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary, right? So in essence, to your question, why doesn't God reveal himself to the masses, right? That's a pretty great example, and that can be applied today in this day and age too, right? So when it comes down to it, I think one, it's a question of mind over matter, right? That's definitely number one. Number two is, how deep is your strength, right? And what does it take to break it? And I think to your point about your synopsis about like if God revealed himself, then he'd just be another thing, right? That people can actually point at and say, well, there it is, right? Rather than something that's a little bit more complex and intricate to define, right? And you hear the expression divine intervention thrown around a lot, right? And I think, to be perfectly honest, I don't think that expression really conveys what it should, because, and what I mean by that is that I don't think personally that there is such a thing as divine intervention. I think it's just something like it's just an expression that can encompass a miracle, right? And anything of short of like turning water to wine or splitting, or walking on water, et cetera, right? Like, I think things do happen for a reason, right? And to your other point, what about things happen to good people? I mean, like all those things, all those questions are really intertwined, and you can ask yourself that why is there suffering? Why is there famine? Why is there this? Why is there that? Like in the world, in all its complexities and all its riches and all its resources and abundance in this world, like how is it still possible that there's certain regions in the world that suffer from famine, that don't have access to clean drinking water, bare necessities? Like how is there all these sufferings that are happening in the world that that can be answered by the Almighty, right? My answer to that essentially is that, and I don't know if there's a certain scripture in the Bible about this, or I might have heard it somewhere, that God favors man over his angels, right? Because his angels essentially were not given free will, right? They were created to serve God in his divinity, right? The difference between us and angels is that we have free will, right? And we can choose to do certain things that will have repercussions, whether they're good or bad, right? And that's wherein lies the answer, in my opinion, right? Why doesn't God reveal himself? Because you take yourself out of the equation, right? I'll give you, you take God out of the equation, right? Because the answer really is, at the end of the day, and this is probably just another topic, but the concept of heaven and hell to me means the concept just means a lot of things to a lot of people, right? To me, what it means, what I believe it means is, and this is also a lot of scripture in the Bible as well too, right? We'll exclude the fact whether the occurrences in the Bible were fact or fiction, because we can talk about ours, and we're not even scholars or experts in the matter, right? But going back to it, and I think I'll make like a very odd analogy, here. So, as to why God takes himself out of the equation and why he doesn't reveal himself to the masses, right? So the correlation, the example here, right, would be like if you've seen experiments where you put mice in a maze, right? And they essentially you put them into the entrance and they need to find the exit, right? Now, most animals have a great a sense of smell, right? And they're guided. It's one of their very strong instincts because they do not have opposable thumbs like you and I, or a very high cognitive function. But if you put a mouse in a maze, a very large maze, right? The mouse is more likely to find the way out if you put a piece of cheese by the exit, right? Mm-hmm. But if there is no cheese and the mouse is really just trying to find its way out, right, it'll be a lot more challenging for the mouse to find the exit without the cheese, right? So the cheese in this analogy is pretty much God, right? So if God is there, all right, and present and showing you the way, not necessarily taking you from A to B, but being there and allowing you to find your way, right? That's essentially the concept of religion and in correlation to whether God presents himself or not, right? Now, your question essentially is it's a little bit broad and it could be interpreted in different ways, right? Why doesn't God manifest himself physically or otherwise, right? Why doesn't he just snap his finger and feed the hungry or cure the ill or whatnot, right? So it could be like interpreted different ways, but that's pretty much the gist of it. And a lot of people, much like mice, really spend their entire life looking for answers and trying to find answers and this and that, right? But religion and belief in God is essentially just the cheese. It's what kind of keeps them going, and it's what helps people find hope at the end of the day, right? And when you're facing despair, like to the degrees where even the thought of suicide really plays a factor at one point or another, right? It's something to believe. It's something. It's not necessarily tangible, but it's something to believe that gives you hope at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I agree with you. There's a lot that you said that was really interesting. I don't want to start a new conversation, so I'm going to just go to my second question, my second point. So you mentioned, and I think it's a really interesting point that like you compared it to the fact that, God doesn't jump in and heal all the sick or feed all the hungry and stuff like that. And I think that made me think of like the fact that, and you talked about divine intervention and stuff. And it made me think that like, that's true because God, as we all know, hopefully, that he gave us free will. So in order to actually exercise our free will, he can't like jump in at every opportunity and be like, okay, this is your free will, but I'm going to do it my way. You know what I mean? So
it defeats the purpose. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, Maureen, just another quick note before we move on further. One also very important note is that just the concept of existence, right? A lot of people ask the question, why are we here? What's our purpose? What's this? What's that? Like, is it just an accident, or is there a purpose for us actually being here, right? Just to summarize that, I think like people undervalue their own existence, right? Because if you go back to what scientists have been able to discover was maybe a quantum Planck in time of what happened just after the Big Bang, right? But they don't know what led to the Big Bang, right? So that's one of the questions between science and religion that they can discuss over years. But the one underlying factor that's essentially proven by science is that all the atoms in existence across the entire universe are all interconnected, right? So when you say, why am I here? Nobody really knows why they're here, but there is a reason why you are here, all right? So Newton even said it, for every action, there's opposed and equal and opposite reaction, right? So, for anybody that ever questions why they're here, you can search for answers all the time, but there is a purpose. We just don't know what it is, right? And I think living, right? There's another saying that Bob Marley actually expresses very eloquently, right? And this is ideology that I really hold very dearly to me. And he said, people don't die and go to heaven, right? He said you have to live in your heaven, right? So the concept of the Bible to me really is just kind of like you create your heaven, right? Because the life that you were given really is, in essence, what you make of it, right? So it can be your heaven or it can be your hell, but all the decisions that you make throughout the course of your life determine the outcome.
That's very similar to what Jesus was saying. Actually, he talks about starting the kingdom of heaven here. So like Christian belief is that heaven is when you're reunited with Christ, because right here we're separated from him. Like we know of him, but we're not physically present with him, like except for with the Holy Spirit. But with God the Father and God the Son, we're not physically in their presence. But that's what Jesus says. He says like the heaven kind of starts here. So and I agree with you about the whole purpose of life. It's really hard, and I think it's really like all of us are kind of searching for that, and the idea of being fulfilled and stuff like that. And I think that a hint of what it probably, a part of what it is for all of us is to do something for others. Like, I think all of us in our purposes, some part of it is something for other people, not just for ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that all of us probably feel. Like we all feel like when you're doing something for other people that gives you more purpose, it gives you more, I don't know what the word is. It just feels good, feels right. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big part of it as well. And yeah, and I was going to say, on the topic, I actually put something else in here. There was another point that I wanted to mention. I don't know if you're going to agree with me on this, but in the Bible, it does refer to people who see God. So, as like, I believe there's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, right? Mm. So God, many people on earth have seen God the Son, which is Jesus, right? Because he came on earth and he's manifested himself. But God the Father, however, when he has in small ways manifested himself in the Old Testament, before Jesus himself came down, people were really afraid to be in his presence. So, and there are a few quotes or a few verses, like Exodus 33:20 said, but he said, and this is God speaking, "You cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live." And then in Deuteronomy 5:25, the Israelites are talking and they said, "Now why then should we die? For this great fire will consume us if we hear the voice of the Lord our God any longer than we will die." Another part in Exodus 19:21. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down, warn the people so that they do not break through to the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish." And some people even died just from touching the Ark of the Covenant who weren't supposed to. Or so, I mean, like, basically, I think that if people, I think sometimes we minimize the idea of God. Like people attribute it to this very abstract concept of like this fuzzy loving guy in the clouds, and he just loves everybody, and he's just like this happy jolly Santa Claus kind of guy. But I honestly think that we're talking about the ultimate master of the universe. So I feel like there should be a little bit of fear, because I mean, if you're walking down the street and you see a big guy coming up to you on like the sidewalk at night, you'll be a little bit scared, right? And it's just a normal human being. So I feel like if we were in the presence of the ultimate master of the universe, there would naturally be a little bit of apprehension, right? And because like, I think a lot of times our concept of God is not complete. Like even with me, I'm still formulating parts of God. Like there's so much to him. So I think that if he were to, and again, biblically, Jesus will come down on the end of time, and he will sort everybody out. So the people who follow him and the people who don't follow him, right? That's what the Bible says. So, there will be a time where he will reveal himself to the masses eventually, but it's not a situation where he's just sitting up in the sky and everybody every day can see him in and out and just go about living their lives. The day that he comes back is going to be the day that he is like, okay, I've given everybody all the chances they have, and now it's time to pay the piper. You know what I mean? So I think personally, I do think that it's something that should be taken very seriously. And at the same time, God doesn't want us to come to him like only out of fear, but also out of love. So he does deal with us very gently, and he set things up so that the maximum number of people would choose him. But he knew, because we have whatchamacallit, free will, that there would be people who's not going to choose him. But in order to have genuine love for God, you have to have the choice, right? If we're all robots, that's not real love. And he wants us to come to him out of our own love. So he has to give everyone the choice.
Are you speaking to the Father, the Son, or the Holy Spirit here?
Well, I mean, I believe they're all one. So what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I don't want to really open up like another can of worms while we're just trying to analyze one thing here, right? But when you say, by choosing God, right, that can mean different things to different people, and obviously different religions, right? So
I'm talking from a Christian perspective. So I'm talking about the Christian God. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what again, because I believe the Bible. So I that's my understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what else was I going to say? Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to also mention something about faith when you were talking about the leap of faith. Mm-hmm. Something I've come to like realize recently for myself. A lot of times when people talk about faith, or when people like say, I've heard it said, oh, sorry, that scared me. My dog just barked. When people say that just have faith is not a good answer, I think it's because they're coming from the perspective of faith being believing in something without any actual real reasons for believing in it, like just blindly believing in something that doesn't make necessarily sense. But that's not how I interpret or explain faith. I believe faith is believing in something that you may not be able to physically, materialistically prove, but makes sense logically, and you have good evidence to believe it. So that's how when I say I believe something out of faith, it's not because it makes no sense, but I'm just going to believe it regardless. It's because, no, it makes logical sense. And this is the reasons why I believe. I have good reasons for believing it. So, yeah, I just wanted to preface that because I think that's important.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Hold on. Okay, go ahead. I'm gonna let you go before I continue. Yes. What do you?
I guess to some degree, I do agree. And begin at the beginning of your dialogue or your comments there. Like I think, and that's why I didn't really want to. Get too much into like beliefs of other religions, because entering the kingdom of God at the at the end of the day, it boils down to your personal beliefs, right? So if we're speaking on a Christian platform, that's great, but to listeners who have different religious beliefs, where do they stand?
Well, okay, it all comes down to one basic point, okay? Do you believe, who do you think Jesus is? Or do you believe him? Is he a liar? Is he crazy? Or is he telling the truth? So you have to pick one, and then that will determine everything else. So if you believe that Jesus is telling the truth, and he's not lying or he's not misleading people, he literally said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So he didn't say no one comes to the Father who doesn't go to church. He didn't say no one comes to the Father who doesn't, practice this tradition or that tradition or do this or that. He says no one comes to the Father except through me. So the requirement of this is literally you have to believe in Jesus Christ. So if you believe in him, then you go to the Father. Everyone who knowingly rejects him, he's very clear about that in many parts of the Bible. They are just not going to. And these are not my words. This is what the Bible says. So it's not like I have a personal vendetta against people of other religions. I don't. In fact, I love them. I love everybody. I literally do. And I know that sounds like, oh yeah, sure, you love them, but you think they're going to hell. I don't know what, okay? I don't know. I just know that I believe what Jesus said, so I'm going to follow what he says. So, I like when people ask me, that's a really tough question to ask a Christian because it sounds like Christians are bigoted, but what you have to understand is that it's not an exclusive club. Anybody can join, anybody can come, and in fact, it's for everyone. So I don't think like everyone chooses their own belief, right? And this was actually going into another point that I was going to make. And my heart is beating so fast. I just want you to know I'm really nervous talking about it. I was going to say, in regards to faith, that everyone has faith, even those who don't believe in God. They put their trust in science or whatever other thing to draw and use faith to draw conclusions. So like most scientific theories and conclusions start from a premise of rejecting anything that isn't a material phenomenon. So they start from the bias and then work to affirm that bias. Whereas people who don't hold such biases, like people who believe in God or agnostics or whatever, they're more free to go where the evidence leads. And hold on, there was another point of this. So in regards to this perspective of heaven and stuff, what's really interesting, Kevin, is that when you start actually looking at some of the other religions and their perspectives on heaven, some of them don't even believe in heaven at all. Some of them don't believe that some of them believe that they have to do a certain amount of, I think the Muslims, they believe that you have to do more good works than bad. And then at the end of your life, then if you have more good works than bad, then you go to heaven. Jews, I'm not sure what their beliefs are, but every religion has a different perspective of heaven. So I always find it kind of weird, I guess, when people get offended at the Christian perspective. But I always feel like it's kind of like you don't want Christ, but you want Christ's heaven. It makes no sense to me. I don't get that. So I feel like if you want Christ's heaven, then yeah, you can have it. It's not a...
Well, here's the thing. Because I would have to do a little bit more literature in the Quran or the Torah or what have you, what other religious scriptures there are to make intelligible synopsis on other cultures and other beliefs and their afterlives, right? But the fact of the matter is that I don't know enough about any of those other religions and what their beliefs are in the afterlife, right? Because like you said, it's not an exclusive club, right? So if heaven is your reward, is the reward for Christians being good Christians, doing their Christian thing, right? I mean, what's to say that there's not the same for the Jews or for the Muslims, for the Hindus, for this, that, and the other, right? Like, I mean, like this conversation, as you said, it essentially is based on a platform for Christians and Christian believers, right? Yeah. So that in and of itself is outlined very clearly, and but the fact remains that there are not nuances, but like there are other factors to consider, right?
Yeah.
But if we're speaking implicitly on the Christian religion, then I think you and I are more or less on the same page there. Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing because you mentioned that going to heaven is as a result of doing your Christian thing or like doing Christian things. And I just need to correct that a little bit. It's a little bit, there's a small nuance there, which is that Christians don't believe that they go to heaven by any of their own works, but only by their faith, because there's nothing that we as Christians could do to earn heaven. And only by Jesus accepting that Jesus took the penalty for us, that's why we're going to heaven. So it's, for example, if you go in front of a judge, the judge will say, you a Christian, you are guilty. You deserve to go to hell. Then I will say, Jesus is going to take my punishment for me. And then I get to go free. So that's how Christians see it. It's not faith-based. It's not works-based. It's not like if I go to church, if I get baptized. There are some Christian denominations who believe that there are works that you need to do, but the Bible is very clear that it's not by any works, that it's just by your faith in Jesus. It's a free gift that you are given the minute you accept Christ.
Mm-hmm. So for example, if you are baptized at birth, and then you grow up to be atheist, what's the consensus there?
What do you mean?
Like, I mean, correct me if I'm mistaken, right? But I don't know if I've heard this correctly, but they say that if you're baptized, essentially, you're rite of passage to heaven in your afterlife.
So baptism is a public declaration of your faith. So if you were baptized as a baby and you grow up and become a Christian, then great. You can get baptized again. That's what happened to me. I recently got baptized, even though I had been baptized as a baby, and it's just as a public declaration of my faith. If you become baptized as a baby, you grow up as an atheist, you're an atheist. That's it. Baptism doesn't mean anything then. It's not like a magic spell that automatically gets you a ticket to heaven. It's just a public declaration of your faith.
Right. And just on a related note, I guess, for people who, if you're talking about your faith, right, versus works, for people who do a lot of wrong, right, generally speaking, but they go to church very frequently, and they atone for their sins, or go to confession, et cetera, and they're absolved from their sins, right? What happens to people who genuinely do wrong intentionally, but through a loophole of going to church for confession, really essentially just absolves them from their sins? What happens then?
Well, okay,
in your opinion?
Yeah, I'll just tell you what I think, okay? And these are actually all questions I've asked and I've heard people ask. So these are, I'm glad that you're asking them because I think they're important. So I think that God, and the Bible indicates this as well, that when Jesus was on the earth, what did he say to the Pharisees? He was very critical of them. He called them whitewashed tombs. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're doing your all your Christian whatever, if you're going to confession, doing all this, but if your heart is not there, you can't fool God. There's no way. He's perfect, complete, and he knows everything. So all of us, when we pass or when we die, none of us are going to be surprised by what we get. Like Dr. Frank Turek said that, and I thought that was so brilliant. We're not going to, somebody who is trying to manipulate and get through a loophole, we're not humans in the legal system where you can get through. This is God. He sees the intention. He sees your heart. He knows what you're doing. He knows what you're trying to do. Like, everyone is going to get what they deserve in the end. Everyone. So, like just being like, oh, I'm sorry, God, but you don't really mean it. You haven't really confessed or repented, because you don't just have to confess. You have to repent, which means you have to turn away from the things that you were doing. Mm-hmm. So
just on that note, just while we're on it, right? Mm-hmm. So on that note, if your heart's not in it, right? And what's the consensus on people who are genuinely good people, who do good deeds, who live a good life, but they don't do it through the quote unquote appropriate channels, right? Which is religion, Christianity, et cetera, right? There's a lot of people who are out there who are genuinely good people, who don't go to church, who don't read their Bible, who don't, do this, that, and the other, who aren't really considered Christians, who can be, point in fact, atheist, agnostic, et cetera, but who have genuine, good intentions, right? Based on the point you just made, right, about if your heart isn't in it, then it essentially doesn't count, and God sees your intentions. So what happens to those people, in your opinion?
Okay, this is what I heard someone else say. I thought this was a really great answer. Basically, it's, so your question can be said in more than one way. So your question is, what about the people who are good but don't necessarily follow Christ? And there's also the other side of it, which is, what if the people who are good but have never heard of Christ, right? So that kind of falls into that same category, right? So the people who are quote unquote good and have never heard of Christ, but might accept him, then when they go to heaven, like if they've never heard, then God will deal with it that way. Like, you've never heard, so this is again, he knows their hearts. But the people who are good, but don't have rejected God and rejected Christ, it makes me ask the question. It's a very hard question. This is going to go into a whole other area. How do you define good? What standard are you using to define good? Good compared to...
Are you speaking rhetorically, or are you asking?
No, I'm asking you because
okay.
The reason I'm asking is because remember that good for you is subjective. Good for all of us is subjective.
Okay. Yeah. So it is subjective, but I think on the merits of just basic fundamentals, right? And you can make the correlation to the 10 Commandments if you wish. Don't kill anybody, don't cheat, don't steal, don't commit adultery, et cetera, right? Like, let's use those parameters for all intent and purposes. Right.
So the thing is, so there's two things I wanted to say about this. So first of all, if you're saying that they follow God's law, I'm assuming that's what you mean. Don't cheat. You're saying the 10 Commandments. Those are just 10 of like hundreds of commandments, by the way, that God gave. And if you're just trying to justify yourself through the law, it's going to be very hard, because that means you should never lie either. And I don't know anyone on this earth who has ever existed who has never lied. And any one sin will separate you from God. So the minute you sin once, you are automatically separated from God, because God is holy and perfect and he cannot accept sin. So that's why we need Jesus. And that's why I keep going back to, it's not because we're good, we do good works, and that's why we go to heaven. No, because we all fall sin. All of us fall short. The Bible says not even one person is good, not even one. So, except for Jesus, but so all of us fall short. Even if you look at the Old Testament and you just follow those laws, they're really, really hard to follow. If you've ever disrespected your parents, you were supposed to be put to death. So, I mean, those laws are really, really hard to follow. So I would say that's why we need Jesus, because good is really, it's a very difficult topic, and it's a very difficult thing to contextualize objectively, especially if you're talking about all different religions and all different people. They all have different ideas of what good is. So biblically, in order to, like, if you look at the Jews have like tons of rules, right? Christians, now we are not bound by those kind of rules because we were redeemed by Christ. So we're not bound by the same rules that the Jews have. And again, we're redeemed by grace, not by faith, not by works. So that keeps going back to that question, to that point. Yeah. So it's a heavy topic, but it's really good.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in for sure.
We covered a lot, I feel like, right? And I wanted to just say that I want to point out that I'm not an expert, but there's a lot of really great resources on this topic and a lot of topics. And I just wanted to give a few to anybody who might be watching. Two books to start with these kind of difficult questions in mind is Case for a Creator. That's by Lee Strobel. And the other one that's really good is called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And that's by Norman Geisler and Dr. Frank Turek. And he's one of my absolute favorite apologists. If you are interested on YouTube, he has a channel called Cross Examined where he answers tons of questions. He's really great. And yeah, so I feel like at this point we should probably wrap up. And I really appreciate you coming on here, Kevin. It's been awesome talking to you and having your perspective. And I appreciate you taking your time to do this. And hopefully we'll do more in the future.
Yeah, hopefully. I don't mind at all. Am I your first speaker?
You are. You're my first speaker.
Nice. Okay.
Woo! Cool.
I don't mind at all coming back on, and I think it's important to exchange dialogue, like you said, respectfully. You know what I mean? Like everybody's going to have different opinions, different views, different ideologies, right? And I think it's good that you created a safe space to do that. Non-judgmental, and it's good to hear different people's views, and also it's educational too, right? I mean, if you don't limit your speakers to just being Christians, which clearly you have not, I think that's a good starting point for exchanging dialogue and intellectual discourse.
Agreed.
So 100%. Thanks for having me, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Me too. I appreciate it, Kevin. So we're going to log off and say bye, guys. Thank you for listening.
Everyone.